So Melinda's officially resigned. So once Will gets back, you can call to order. And then since we do have members present in recess and Austin's not here, he's going to be watching this recording, I would just go ahead and state who's not present, kind of like what we did. Yeah. That's fine. Mhm.
When I was here last, there was discussion about going ahead and getting that meeting date set for the 22nd of August. Did that happen? Everybody's good with that? You're gonna do it tonight as part of closing this meeting, or did you get that set for a special meeting notice or anything? 'Cause, you know, that's the week I'm not available in August. Or are you gonna do it that night, like in your regular August meeting, and then continue?
We we did put a hold. I think that you guys can amend your guys' meeting schedule tonight, because I don't, as of right now, there's nothing that I foresee being on the August agenda that's going to take a long time, meaning that we would have to have two meetings. So if we want to go ahead and, at the end of the meeting, I don't know how to answer that question without Austin being here. I can call him real quick, but I think that,
I think I can make a suggestion.
yeah.
What you can do is at the end of this meeting tonight, before you adjourn, while you're in open session, you can vote to reschedule the 17th, meeting of the 17th to the 22nd. As long as you, if you do it in an open meeting like that, it's not a special meeting. I think that's your regular meeting.
Correct. No, it's I guess it would be the 15th. Be August the 15th, wouldn't it? Because it would,
August 22nd is what we were trying to set up.
yeah, so we would be rescheduling the August 15th meeting to August 22nd.
August 15th to August.
I can walk you through it when we get there.
And the other option would be to continue this meeting. Either one of those is legitimate.
I think we go ahead.
This one to the 22nd and cancel your 15th meeting, or you can reschedule your 15th to the 22nd.
I say we reschedule the 15th to the 22nd. The only other option is that we meet the 15th. If we have any minor agenda stuff, we go ahead and knock it out. If we don't, we open, and then we just automatically recess to the 22nd. But that would require you guys to come in on the 15th. If that's the safer procedure, just, I mean, because like I said, I could get random applications, but from a development standpoint, even if I were to receive any type of application at the current moment, I don't think it would be ready to go for the August meeting unless it's like a special use permit, which once again, you guys are making just a recommendation. So that's up to you guys how we want to do that. But we can discuss that further if you want to open the meeting, and we can discuss that further at the end.
I would like to re-adjourn the planning board meeting from July 18th. Do we need a motion to re-adjourn or just reconvene? Reconvene.
I don't think we need a motion.
I guess re-adjourn is like calling it off instead of, yeah. All right, well, it's reconvene, boom.
And I will state for the record that Councilmember Mark Leese is absent, Vice Chair Richard Holzberg is absent, and Board Member Michael Lavelle is also absent from this recess meeting.
All right, and with that said, I guess we turn it over to Rick.
Well, I guess, yeah, we're moving to agenda item number 5, I think was on the agenda, which is the Marvin Development Ordinance discussion. So tonight, Rick is here again with us to review the articles that were previously introduced at the June meeting, which are Articles 4, 5, 7, 14, 22, and 23, as well as introduce new Articles 18, 19, and 20. All of those should be included in your guys' binders. I made a note on everybody's, I reprinted Article 4 and 5 because there were some revisions done. I left the old article because some of you guys had some notes in there, and I just tried to put a little sticky note down so you can differentiate between the two. But with that said, I'll turn it over to Rick.
We just need to replace, if we don't have notes in here, old Article 4 with new Article 4. We can get rid of them, okay.
Will, yours are in your binder already? Those are Rich. I'm gonna put those in his box and stuff. Yeah, you're good.
Wow, special treatment.
Wait, no, Kelly, yours should be done too. You're taking Michael's.
Mine says old Article 5.
Yeah, but in front of it should be the new Article 5.
I messed up on Article 5. I
Okay.
didn't change the watermark, and I'm gonna be sending that back to him. Just for the record, it should show up easily, so he put a sticky note on your view Article 5.
So take that out, because that's Michael's.
Oh, these are Michael's,
Look at
okay.
Article 4, you'll see how I put a view watermark that has REV in it for revision for the 5, so you can always tell all pages when you get. And I failed to put
Oh, so leave these in.
I did, you can take them out, but
Okay.
this is revised, old behind it. This is new, and it says it right there.
Okay, cool, thank you, I appreciate that.
is on page 2 of Article. Let's see. Page 2 of Article 5. In Article 5. Let me get to that. Yeah, the best way to tell the difference is on page 2 of Article 5. If there's any confusion between the two watermarks, and my apologies again, is that the old one on page 2 has a big blob of yellow, and the view page 2 has a small one. Also, Chair Gates, I'd like to take just a moment to say one other thing before I dive into the details. There will be times when, also had to do it a few times, that I will be making suggestions about language in motions and procedure. There is a reason. I'm not doing it to be rude or to inject myself unnecessarily, but I always make sure, for the record, that all of our proceedings are correctly carried out, so that that is never a component of any challenge in the future as to the validity of the order.
I appreciate it, thank you.
I'm never trying to, be rude, I'm trying to keep us on track. So, obviously, those Article 4 pages that you see have the changes that were suggested in the discussion, that was talked about in the meeting. And so if you want to look at that page 2 pretty quickly here, excuse me, page 3 pretty quickly in Article 4, you'll see where we changed the seating. Made a couple of other little adjustments in there, but that's about it. Just the stuff that was discussed, during our meeting. And any deletions that I take out that no longer apply are just gone. So if you keep your old language and want to go back and look at it and compare, that's the best way to do that. Otherwise, you're looking at only new language, but I will highlight new language. Moving on to Article 5. Same scenario where we modified, for example, the neighborhood meeting component. There we go. Article 5, where we modified the neighborhood meeting component to expand the mail notice requirement, as was suggested and requested. That's why there's just a small amount of yellow. Everything else you've already seen. That small amount is the only thing new. I had yellowed it in the very beginning to talk about, because it's not a requirement that towns do neighborhood meetings, but I highly recommend it. And I wanted to make sure we talked about it, and I'm glad we did. And then, of course, there's minor change on page 3, continuing, expanding the period for the planning board continuing these items. Because Article 5, as you know, is about rezonings, basically, what are called zoning map amendments or zoning text amendments. And sometimes some boards want to keep that tight, and some like yourselves wanted to give yourself possibly more time in between meetings to avoid conflict or to be able to do other research and investigations on your own. So that's what that's really all about. So I wanted to point those out. The next batch of review is the stuff that was handed out at the last meeting that we've not reviewed before, and that's Article 7, which is essentially captures the essence of the various permits and procedures for plan, plat, that sort of thing, approvals, and it covers all the different types of approvals that we've identified so far, whether it's a sign permit, whether it's a whatever the case may be. Okay? Were there any questions or comments or feedback on Article 7's draft? All right. Hearing none, there's a set of draft certificates that I recommend, and the format for the certificates is done, and they appear at the back of Article 7. The format of those certificates is set up this way to make it easy for the survey community to essentially copy and paste files from your website onto their plats without having to do much modification or any modification like retyping. When we do it in such a way that they have to retype them, that's when we have to then at the staff level go back and review every word. You know what I mean? And so if we can tell right off that they have essentially copied and pasted it by looking at the structure of these, then we can, it streamlines our ability when we're reviewing, because I have had alterations made to engineers and surveyors' certifications.
Is this available on PDF?
Yeah, that's a PDF.
Available PDF?
Yeah, that's available PDF.
Rick, quick question. On the permits and stuff, once adopted, and this is more of a staff procedural thing, will myself / village staff need to update all permits, or will you be providing
We can
work together?
work together
Okay.
on that. You've got some things that you're going to like that we may not necessarily ordain be required with the form, but you may like on the form, or you may like to have. I like to kind of keep it with a general permit application, and then everything else is essentially attached to that, whether it's a site plan or a sign or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, currently we have about 12, probably different.
A lot of towns will develop permits for everything, like permits for blue signs and permits for red signs, and I'm like, why do you want to do that?
I've been working to simplify it. I was just wondering because I think that.
We can help you with that. We don't have any, we recommend a primary permit and that everything is attached to it so that the permit isn't basically an application. And because there are some things that can be issued via some other form of communication, particularly a letterhead document if you need to, or even signed off drawings. I like to actually approve drawings so we know which drawing is the one. It's not just the attached one, it's this one.
Yep.
Because especially since electronic submittals have become more prevalent, it's easier for people to get confused when you've got so many files floating around. So that's one of the areas where it's not necessarily helped. It's kind of got its, for every yin, there's a yang, so to speak. Now, something I want to say about this certificates page, just so that you'll kind of see what's going on. Notice the first one says all subdivisions. All subdivisions means it could be a simple minor subdivision, okay? The back page is for all major subdivisions, so they would do the front and the back. They would do both sets. Rather than having a little, ones where they have to look through and say, do I put these on there? Do you need that one too? Or did they leave one off? I try to give them as much guidance as possible in as simple a term as possible. So a typical new residential subdivision of 30 homes or something is going to have both sides of this appearing in the final plats. The basic stuff on the front, and then the stuff that's really specific to the infrastructure component, which is what's appearing on the back.
What about exempt plats? Like,
Pardon me?
What about exempt plats? I mean, I know that there's just a general.
Exempt plats, you can't require a certificate on it.
Okay.
Some surveyors will put one on there for you, and you can sign that one. A lot of people mix that up a little bit, and they'll say, what do you require on an exempt plat? The point of it being exempt is you can't. The only thing you can look at on an exempt plat is the zoning-related stuff. Does this new lot meet the minimum lot size or width components?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. If you are processing it like a subdivision in any way, you are beyond the boundaries of the statute.
Yeah, I was mainly focusing on any type of lot line revision.
I don't give them that, because that would be a requirement.
Okay.
If it meets that exemption, the surveyor can put what they want to about that exemption, and you can say, yep, I can sign it, you know, I can sign this or that, or if they don't put anything on there, you can write exempt and sign it and date it when you ink it, and they can take it and record it. Typically, when they do that, though, the county's plat recording officer will sometimes say, did you really do this, or is this something weird? Because the plat review officer for the county doesn't check compliance. They check to make sure somebody's not taking the back of this piece of paper and writing on here that the chair's going to give me all our money and record it. You know, the plat review officer just makes sure it's a legitimate document for recording, not whether it's approved, you know, not whether it should be or shouldn't be approved. That's Hunter's job to determine if it should be or shouldn't be approved. Exempt plats are a little funny, just a little bit funny.
Hunter, can I ask you a question? Is during construction, if there are large boulders in the ground and they have to dynamite, do they have to pull a permit for that and notify?
For
the
blasting?
neighbors? Blasting, yes.
Use of dynamite, yes. That's not a permit from us,
It's a state.
though. Your fire department, your fire safety people are going to be dealing with that.
Are neighbors supposed to be notified that it's happening
Typically
when their
not.
house starts shaking?
We don't have anything in particular for that. Never have seen that.
Isn't that odd, though, that,
They don't blast, you know.
no, I know, but
Yeah.
especially in rural areas around here,
Right.
when you've got someone,
They have to satisfy the fire marshal's requirements.
oh, it's just odd.
I remember when they were doing, Bobcat, we had panel.
Yeah, you're going to get that. All day long. Now, here's now that you bring it up, let me tell you where you can address it. You can address it in the development agreement. Remember, I told you there's that development agreement. When I introduced this article, Article 7, I said the development agreement in the back is your secret sauce, because it is a requirement and we've got a list of all the things that require it. And any project that creates new public infrastructure, that means roads, streets, water lines, sewer lines, doesn't matter if it's the town's water line or the county's water line, doesn't matter, new infrastructure. That's when they're going to be doing that for the most part. Also, in certain districts where they would be doing larger buildings, okay, those are required. And so that's the place you put that. That is an agreement between the town and the developer to conduct things in a certain way. Like, for example, if they are going to be having to blast rock, then what, are we gonna limit hours? Let's negotiate that. That development agreement is greater than putting it in the ordinance. If you put it in the ordinance and, you know, you can only do it between here and here, there might be extenuating circumstances where that's not necessarily a good one-size-fits-all solution. You might want to narrow that window down because of the location, because it's near the school or something like that, like limits it to after 3 p.m., you know, or what have you, if it's going to be taking place during, when school's in session, or whatever the case may be. That's just an example. But, so development agreements, and did you look at that? Did you look at that much?
Well, what I was actually bringing up was actually, it's an individual, it's a real example, an individual build, so they wouldn't even be under a development agreement. But especially when everyone around them has septic and well. You know, I don't know much about blasting, but does the fire department understand that, you know, like blasting and how that might affect,
The
like,
people that are
surrounding-
doing blasting have to be licensed to do that. So it's not much different than the engineers that are designing a utility or a street, or the architects that are working on a building, or a contractor that's working on a building. Those persons that are using those materials are doing it under a license to do it. And so there are standards. Pardon me? In your situation?
It's the boulders.
There's huge boulders all around this area in the ground.
See, to me, though, it just, because so much is interconnected under the ground, like if you're blowing up one thing, and you've got neighboring properties that have septic and well systems, but no one's been notified, has anyone, and a lot of times, you know, like when you go out to do the utilities, like the Miss Utility, like call and they'll mark, well, our things aren't listed with the utility companies because we have septic and well. You know what I mean? So like, if no one knows where those,
Chair Cates?
no, but I mean like the rural sections that this was happening in was, so. Yeah,
Chair
I just-
Cates, I'm running, it's a very valid question. It's a very valid question, and I'm running my processors as you ask these questions, because I have to make sure it fits within the way that the authority works in 160D for it to be in an ordinance. There are public safety places where we can possibly put it, and there are other construction things that we can rely on, but the reason I want to circle back to that development agreement, because right now in my template development agreements, I have all these provisions for communicating all activities with, and coordinating that with town staff prior to excavating, prior to doing this, prior to doing that. So we can add that into those components, so it's coordinated, and then we can add into the development agreement, and that, you know, a periphery will be notified, or whatever the notification is that is appropriate for that project. Those kinds of things can go into the development agreement, and that's the beauty of the development agreement. They let you negotiate things, okay? They let you negotiate things that we may not have the authority to just set that standard and say, well, our zoning ordinance says you can't blast, but what do you mean we can't blast? Can't blast what? We're going to get big pushback from attorneys on that. So if we put it in an agreement where they are agreeing about our concern might be timing, might be notifications, it might be time of day, could be anything. That, to me, would be the most binding, because the development agreement actually is something that has teeth in it.
Yeah, and to be honest,
I
like,
use
if-
them on all major projects that are
Yeah.
described in here, and I've got them going on right now in towns.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm actually
That's
more
how I would
worried
do it.
about the individual builders. Because they're, you know, they're not under a development agreement. There is no ordinance that, you know, like, we have a lot of hoops to jump through, like, if you're gonna put in a pool, and, you know, you have to, especially one that, like, you know, doesn't fit, you know,
Yeah, if
the
you're putting
standard.
pools in a rocky area, that, I can see that. Now, I don't have an answer for that one.
I mean, I'm just saying that, like, you know, a lot of times when someone's trying to put in a pool that doesn't meet our, you know, traditional criteria, they then go and notify the neighbors that they're gonna be doing something, and you know what I mean? Like, there's,
But we don't require that because we can't.
you don't require,
We don't require them to get approval from their neighbors.
right, but a lot of times they do.
It's a courtesy that they're
Right.
doing.
But now you're talking about you know, an interconnected system of
See-
water tributaries and
Well, here's the thing
rocks and, you know.
I want to take you back to the development of Chapter 160D, which is the authority that this operates under. This deals with, is limited to land use and development. When it comes to construction practices, like whether they use a trenching machine or a backhoe to install a pipe, those techniques are something that are outside of this. It doesn't mean that they're not covered somewhere, but they're not in here. And I think that the big question then would be, and I'm going to turn and pose this to Hunter, because I don't know the answer. I could do the research, but I think Hunter could do it as well, would be to determine the licensure requirements for the use of explosives in construction techniques. That's probably going to come under general contractors' licenses, pool contractors' licenses, et cetera. And my suggestion would be a pool contractor would probably subcontract it to someone who does rock removal and excavation, because that's usually the only reason you would do it is rock removal and excavation. Those contractors generally have it in their license, and they have certain guidelines for it. I don't know what they are, but that's where they are, because every time I've had on an infrastructure project that I was involved in, like sewer lines being laid, and I've had plenty of that laid in rock, because those you can't bend like you can water. Water you can sort of get shallow with and what have you. Sewer's got to be at a certain depth for various reasons. And every time I've had to do it, we've had licensed persons involved in doing it. And then we chose, in managing the project, whether or not there was a sensitivity about something, in other words, time of day or something like that, and notifying folks. In fact, I've been involved as a surveyor, when I was a surveyor, in determining blast fields for quarry blasting. So I've been around it quite a bit, but I don't know the new, excuse me,
Please
my little sister.
silence all cell phones.
Is it $5? Oh, it's 20 to the jar?
Real nickel and
Yeah.
dime to death.
I apologize. I actually got it out as a paperweight for my calendar to talk about the date, so I've kind of lost my train of thought, but my suggestion would be if you want to try to regulate that, we don't put it in here, but we do put it in our appropriate place in our code, which is probably going to be nuisance related, public safety related, not in here. Or we can put it in our development agreements on big projects, but if it's pool contractors,
Well, I don't know. This was actually a house being built.
a house,
Just one house on one lot.
a house, yeah, a house and pools and what have you. I'll tell you what I'll do.
That's okay. I mean, I just was curious as to whether or not that was a permit, like, if we.
Normally
If we
behavior-
permit fireworks, why are we not permitting
Yeah.
blasting?
Well, it should be. If you're doing it on, if you're dealing with fireworks, I mean, in fact, North Carolina doesn't allow but certain fireworks in general. Do y'all issue permits here for
Yes.
those?
You have to, because state statute requires that the governing municipality or county sign off on any type of firework display by a license.
Oh, you're talking about licensed ones. You're not talking about kids in the backyard playing with fireworks.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, you're talking about for displays
yeah.
like a festival or an event, 4th of July.
Yeah, that's the only reason I was asking, is that we permit a lot of things, and so blasting just seemed like.
That may be the place to put it, because I'm gonna digress for a moment. General police-making power, and police doesn't mean blue uniform. I'm talking about just what's called the general police power of local government, is that ability to set those public safety standards, whatever they may be. They may be no skateboarding on the sidewalk or something like that. But under the general police-making power, you have a section of the statutes called general ordinance-making power that municipalities enjoy. And I've had things that were not specifically enabled in North Carolina addressed through general ordinance-making power. that have gone to the Supreme Court, that have been upheld and now actually have place in law. One of them is non-residential property maintenance code, AKA the commercial maintenance code in the state that I brought it from. So forgive me if I'm a little slow, but sometimes I have to run a bunch of processes to run through where the options are, and also identify exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. And if we need to get down to the individual level, not big project level, but the individual level, like somebody blasting something for just a little small deal, I would say that if you've already got policy on explosive, fireworks, any type of explosive materials, that we put it in there.
Yeah, we have in our current ordinance, we do have blasting covered under minimum design standards. Once again,
Say that again?
under minimum design standards and required improvements, but that mainly applies to any type of subdivisions. That's
in your UDO?
in our ordinance, yeah. This is part of the reason that we're doing what we're doing, because
That's out of bounds under this power. I'm not saying it's out of bounds to the town, I'm saying when we have to stay in bounds on 160D. We can't, like, for example, we can't come in here and address other behavioral issues, like no running around the yard naked or whatever. We can't put that in here.
Yeah.
That would come under a different authority.
it's currently under our land use titled Chapter 150, which is subdivisions, minimum design standards and required improvements. And it says blasting permits are issued by Union County Fire Marshal. Any applicant for a blasting permit shall submit an application to the village along with certificate of insurance evidencing all insurance carried by the applicant. After receipt of a blasting permit from Union County, the applicant shall notify in writing the village and all occupants and owners of residents and businesses adjoining the property where the blasting will occur of the intention to use explosive at least 48 hours to blast. Now, I know that's in our ordinance, but that's still something that's not necessarily enforceable.
On the right place.
And the second part of that is, yes, it's under subdivision, so it's like if that was happening for a major subdivision, that's going to kind of be outlined in their construction documents to an extent, and that is something that,
And it's not going to pick up on a pool.
Yeah.
Just because it's in a subdivision doesn't mean it's part of subdivision regulations.
Correct.
The other big difference is these regulations are decriminalized by state statute. These are civil penalties only. Anything that's involving explosives and stuff like that, you want that under criminal codes so that somebody violating that can be arrested. You follow me? That would be my recommendation too. So there's another reason to pull that, and that language is not necessarily bad language. It could be expanded upon to cover a broader application like individual homes or pools or whatnot. But I think moving it to a part of your police power and subject it to criminal penalties, that'll get their attention. That'll make sure that they don't just say, well, it was cheaper to pay the town the $100 fine, you know,
Yeah.
because you want something that's going to be effective. And in land use and development, if they build it wrong, or if they conduct a use, like they open a business in a neighborhood or something like that, where the penalty is a recurring penalty, means if it's still there in 3 days, you're up to day 3, that could be $800 or something substantial, and you can build on that to the point where you get their attention and they stop doing it. A blast is going to be kind of a one-time thing. I'm going to go, like robbing the bank. I'm going to go rob the bank. I'm not going to go back every day and get some more out of it. I'm just going to do it once. So a $100 fine for robbing the bank would not be very much a deterrent. So I think criminal is the place to go with that.
That's helpful, thank you, I appreciate that.
So it's a good question, though, but, and I apologize, that it required a little bit of processing, a lot on my part, to think that through. And so that's what I would suggest, Hunter, is that maybe that be moved. Move it before they get to adoption of this, so it doesn't go away.
yeah, I've got a note to take
Yeah.
that language and,
But it being in there means you have no criminal, you cannot exercise any criminal penalties on that. Okay. Anything else on 7? That was good. All right, I'm going to move us right along. 14, I put over where I put it so it gets found when it's needed. That's the reason it sits over there. It sits over and amongst the stuff that your architects and engineers are looking at when they need to find this. It's pretty simple. It's essentially, I call it flexible development standards because that's the way they're going to be thinking about it, but technically, under the statute, they're modifications. Okay? They're modifications that have to be defined. And I think I said that when we introduced it. And so this is a starting point. You may look at the inches and percents and all that and want new numbers, but that's what that's about. How much do you trust Hunter is what it really says. To work it out, to get it resolved. Do you trust him 10%? Do you trust him 32 inches on a setback? That's 2.5 feet. If there's a problem, and they basically can't just do it. They have to have a reason. So we've got this criteria. Okay, we've got this criteria in there where he has to basically kind of not quite do it the same way the Board of Adjustment would do it, with testimony and all that, but it's based on demonstrated need. Now, if they're poking on him and trying to take advantage of this, there's two outs. Number one, they can't get a variance on a modification. They can either come for the modification or go for a variance with the Board of Adjustment. Number two, and this is the best part, is if he doesn't trust what's going on, he can say, no, you'll have to take that to the Board of Adjustment and apply for a full-blown variance. So if it's an obvious, practical, common sense need that's justified based on these standards, then he can do it. And if he doesn't trust what's going on, he can defer it, and they have to go down the traditional path of a variance. If you don't have this, their only option is a formal variance. So you don't have to have this. This is optional, but the statute does now allow for it as long as you draw some boundaries around it.
And how is something like this documented if you are just allowing modifications?
Put it
It's like-
on the drawing or on the permit and say in accordance with MDO Article Section 14.3.
Right,
blah,
yeah,
blah,
I get
blah.
that, but I mean, like, how do you document what their actual need is?
They may have to give a survey, or they may, just like they would in a variance hearing, they may need to show you some dimensions. They may need to show you some evidence on the ground as to what's going on there that's creating the conflict.
And procedurally, how do you collect that? Do you keep it all in a file if someone ever comes back to question it?
Well, we don't allow this now, but for a variant, for example, for a variance, like a true variance, we had two in the last 2 years, both for basically setbacks, and it was dealing with, hardships. For that, they had to provide a survey. In one instance, it was where the house had to sit way far back from the road because the front yard was an old riding arena, something along the lines, and basically, when they cleared the lot for the development or something like that, they put all the trees in a hole and burned them, and so the ground wasn't stable. It was, but this dates back way before Village. With that being said, all that was documented in part of their variance application. When the variance was approved on the zoning permit, I said, variance, document the number, was approved, said date. I attached the findings of fact, all that stuff with the permit. In this instance, it would probably be something very similar. Once again, I think from a 10%, I mean, if you're looking at, 10% of a 20-foot setback, that's a 2-foot variance, or to an extent, that's stuff where, from layman's eye, looking at it from the road or any of that, it's stuff that isn't going to really be kind of noticeable. So, from a documentation standpoint, I would note it on the permit, and I would, be looking at why it's being requested, and if it's granted, it's granted. But, that's why, I think the 10% is justified. We just did the 10% in the Heritage District revisions for requested deviations. And then that would kind of, be consistent with this. It would just allow it, like I said, something administrative, and anything greater than that, they would have to request a variance and have to go through that process.
Do you feel this would be beneficial in
Oh, yeah.
doing your job?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I said, because right now, like I said, there's been instances where somebody's, they draw it on the survey that it's 10 feet off, and I get a call that it's not, or, a call from a neighbor saying it's not, and I'm like, I'll have a conversation with those property owners, but like, at the same time, if there's been instances where they show it's 10 feet off and they put it 8 feet off, and I haven't gotten a call. And I know about it, but it's just like, I'm not going to address a violation unless it is a formal, or, a complaint to then be further investigated. But like, it's stuff that's so minor that, once again, a lot of people don't realize, even if somebody does it or not. So having this language in here just kind of makes it consistent with that. So yes, I do think it's important. And I think the 10% is reasonable. What is the greatest that you've seen?
Actually, I've only seen about 8 or 9 inches mostly, that range on one. I did have a sidebar joke / story where I had a council member who was not supportive of a builder working in one of the subdivisions, and this council member happened to live in that subdivision, and he was out policing, he was out backing planning staff up and doing measurements on his own, and he found a 1-inch encroachment into a 10-foot yard side setback. And it basically was the way they were pointing brick. And, it was 9 feet and 11 inches or something like that. And he wanted us to make that guy tear that house down. And so I've seen some situations where I've seen power abused, and I think this helps it, because that's one where it was a simple thing where the way that the brick mason pointed the brick, it got out of bounds, and if there had been somebody with rationale and responsibility that signed off on that and said it was okay, then we wouldn't have had that. So we had around and around with that, and there were no provisions in that particular ordinance. This was about 15 years ago. And they went for a variance, and they did get their variance with a split vote of 3 to 2. Excuse me, 4 to 2. 4 to 1. It was a 4 to 1. It was the 4/5 vote on a variance. And that one person that voted against it was one of the best friends of that particular council member. So, moral of the story, always put yourself a little something in there you just might need later on, is kind of the way that I look at tools like that. But I pointed out that this is not a requirement that you have any of this in there. We can literally take 14 out and just reserve that article and be done with it if you don't want to use that tool. I highly recommend that you have something. If you want to restrict the numbers, but have something in there so that everything doesn't have to go to the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah,
That gets caught.
I mean, I look at it from it's just a time standpoint too. Like I said, we had a case in Belgrove where the lot, when Empire purchased the lots basically, and they scaled the survey, their house footprint didn't fit the setback on the plat, or, that they took from the CAD files. And they did a lot line revision. I mean, with us having larger lots, that's kind of a given in itself. Like, it would be different if we had these smaller lots and really kind of getting touchy with that. But Empire owned both the lots, so they did a lot line revision. So if you go look at in Belgrove, there's a lot that goes like this. And it's like, but if we had something like this, because it literally only encroached by like 6 inches to a foot. And that would save some time / just make things cleaner, where there are alternate ways that people can get approval if it's a variance, if it's a lot line revision or something. It's just keeping it cleaner by allowing it through the ordinance.
I want to use a visual demonstration for just a moment. And I just realized it when I looked down. My appearance today is because I was in the because I actually get out and do things related to building, development, construction, and what have you for cities and towns, and so I tried to dress this morning. I thought, okay, I've got to do this, and then I've got to be presentable, but at least I'll be standing behind this little piece of furniture here. So my point in that is that getting out and getting your hands dirty, so to speak, is really an important part of this role that, and I play this role, the same role Hunter does in 2 towns, well, officially in about 10, but routinely in 2. The others are just as backup or sort of the reference point. And it is a reality in construction that you're going to have, periodically, you're going to have some small conflicts, especially now with builders trying to build on as small a lot as they can because of the price of land in different communities and what have you. So you're talking about small fractions of room for error out there if you don't have some kind of tool in the toolbox.
Hunter, I do have a question, is how, if we left this in here, which I actually am for, I am curious as to how you would handle, some of we have builders here that are kind of like the usual suspects, right? They're building all over Marvin. But if they are kind of consistently you're having to consistently use these because they're making mistakes, or, maybe they're doing it on purpose, because they know we have this, or, like when it's actually approved. How would you handle that? Would you then send them in for a variance, knowing that they're like they're constantly?
I mean, it's kind
Asking
of
for
just
this?
looking at it by case, because I don't think, I mean, it's the same thing with a variance. Granting a variance doesn't set precedent that it has to be given to the next person, even if it's the neighbor.
Wait, say that again?
I said, I look at it similar to a variance, that all because it's granted in one situation doesn't mean it's going to be granted again. You're not setting precedent. And correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, because like a variance, you're not supposed to look at precedent.
That's exactly right. In a variance, it's quasi-judicial,
Yeah.
so there is no precedent. Each one is based on its own evidence, in theory.
Yeah, with this, do you
In theory.
think, me applying that same logic, do you see that as an issue? Like, do you see that as an issue?
No, I would
Yeah.
I follow pretty much that demonstration of need, which
Yeah.
is spelled out starts at the bottom of page 1, and it sort of limits what you can really do this on. It's largely going to be setback and like a lot dimension criteria. If you've got any, and that's what I was saying earlier, if you've got any hesitation about the motive or about whether you're being taken advantage of, just simply stop and send them to the Board of Adjustment. You have that written discretion in here. It's in 4.2, it's the last sentence, middle of page 1, 4.2, the last sentence of 4.2. Shall in every case have the discretion to decline to exercise the power to approve or deny modifications as provided herein. So he can just simply say, I'm not going to utilize that, I'm not approving it, I'm not weighing in on it. If you want to make that case, then there's a process in Article 6, variances, to do that. And so that's where you draw the line.
And I don't, like I said, this is more, it's more on the individual. I don't see this happening. One, it wouldn't happen if a major subdivision would be proposed. They have to still comply with the standards here, and I wouldn't let them propose a subdivision that is all 10% less of that, because that's then allowing basically an 8.5, or what would that be, 10, that'd be a 18-foot side setback, and certain things like that, it would get way wonky. It's more of that they get the development proposed with the standards that we adopt in this ordinance. Then if they get them to the ground and, hey, this lot, even though it's on the plat, shows this, this, and this, then that's something could be discuss on like, once again, on kind of an individual basis. It's not going to be setting new standards for a whole development or something along those lines.
We can't set policy based on the individuals. All of these things in here, permits, entitlements, whatever you want to call them, are rights that run with title. They run with the land. They're not about an individual. It's very interesting because this first experience on this topic that I had in North Carolina was in a municipality, a very, very small municipality in Union County, a tiny little municipality that didn't even have its own planning at first, and I was actually writing their ordinance when I was asked by one of the council members who was sitting in attendance at the planning board meetings if there was something I could put in the ordinance to keep a certain builder from building in the town. And I said, no, ma'am, we can't do that. If they meet the standards, they meet the standards. That little itty bitty little town adopted its first zoning, I think that was around 1990, might have been 91, but I think it was 1990. It's known as Waxhaw today. So yeah, behavior is outside of our responsibility. We have to exercise this judgment under the oath of our offices because you're sworn in your role. We are also sworn in our roles. And so the best thing that he can do is exercise that discretion to say, I don't feel good about this. I'm not going to go there. You have a avenue to, it doesn't shut them down. They have an avenue they can pursue.
What? No. Well, that's a lot line, but your lot still had to comply with the ordinances. Like that's it. It's a different. Yeah.
Yeah, you can have more than one right, and, you know, making this change didn't mean you were changing it to something that was not permissible. That's what we're talking about. If it's something that, if you got a 10-foot setback and they need to be at 9.5 feet, and here's a good reason, and it talks about topography, it talks about things like that, then that's something where you can, you have that discretion. What they boil down to, Mr. Owens, is it's kind of variances that somebody that does this job regularly, like Hunter does, can look at and know that that's a slam dunk variance if it goes through that whole process, and I've got a little leeway and that'll work. I can go ahead and do that because it makes sense. It's logical. The creek's doing this on the side, so they want to scoot the house over a little bit more. Helps the environmental situation, helps everything. So okay, that's a good trade-off. I just got a 6-inch modification in Kannapolis on a little spec house I'm building. Well, they gave me a foot. I asked for 6 inches. They went in and gave me a whole foot. It's because they've got this kind of provision in their ordinance. They gave me a whole foot. I just needed 6 inches to protect a giant oak tree. Yeah. So I understand where it works, and it went up the ladder. It went to the department head. It had their process and it had their justification, and I wrote that up and submitted that, and I obtained it and what have you. So it works nicely. That 6 inches, nobody will ever know driving down the street, looking at that house. It doesn't cause any real harm to anyone, what have you. And typically, they're going to have to be associated with some kind of complexity on the lot. Maybe it's an odd-shaped lot. Maybe it's got a creek and topography that creates a problem. That's what it's really about. It's not about just, I want to do a bigger house. Give me a break on my setbacks. Oh, you're a pie-shaped creek? Man, you got it. You're a classic right there for a variance, But think about how, common sense-wise, unless you built a pie-shaped house or a pie-shaped pool behind the pie-shaped house, it makes sense to have these tools, and the boards of adjustment have had them, And they put this in there so that we weren't just loading up boards of adjustment with obvious common sense solutions.
Think of it this way. Since you guys would then be the Board of Adjustments,
Yeah.
would you rather have more meetings?
Yeah, do you want to have it come to you?
Yeah. I mean,
I think it also makes sense from an administrative standpoint, but you're creating less work over like things that shouldn't be brought to.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of time if it's just small.
Well, Chairman Cates, I want to adjust the subject just slightly and ask for some very constructive feedback on this article. Because I had put little flag boxes out beside these to make sure I check. Do you feel comfortable with the numbers? And there are in 3 places. On page 1, it's in near the bottom in 14.3-1 setbacks. That's where it talks about 10% or 32 inches. Either of those numbers on setbacks give anybody any heartburn? Should we change those numbers? Do you want to make it something less? Do you want to make it something different?
I mean, do you think 32 inches you were saying you've only ever seen?
It's about
something-
2.5 feet.
I mean, I don't.
I'll tell you where that comes from. It comes from roughly the overhang on most typical houses. That's about what you're saying, well, normally they can go to there, so you're gonna have an overhang out that far roughly. I mean, the overhang's usually about 2 feet on a lot of houses, maybe a little less, but you've got gutters. And when you take all that into account, you're already seeing the structures, because those are exempt. The overhangs and gutters don't have to meet the setback, it's the building wall. So how far out would we go? We would go out, this would give him the leeway to about go out to where that overhang is. And that's where I came up with the number 32 to begin with.
Okay. Makes
the only
sense to me.
thing that I would say, and looking for input here, is that overall, the 10% I think makes sense. I mean, like I said, 90% of the residents in Marvin have a 50-foot front setback, or 20 on the side, 40 on the rear. My only issue is that there are 3 developments in Marvin that have 5-foot side setbacks. Now, they are their own individual conditional zoning districts, and they're all built out. But with the term whichever is greater,
Okay?
and those 5-foot setback, for example, is 10%, I mean, that's nothing to an extent, but then allowing 2.5 feet on a 5-foot is the only thing which I guess, once again, it's my.
That's right, it's your discretion. And one of the things that they have to remember is that if they get below an 8-foot separation to the next building, then they're triggering fire-rated materials on the exterior of the building. So there's little pieces of safety net that are built in there. Would you like to, since this is really your tool, would you like to give up some of that leeway? Do you want to suggest an alternative number for the board to consider?
Well, I mean,
10 inches, 12, 16?
I mean, the 32, like I said, I think would line up with everything else, because even, like, for a side setback of a normal residential structure, that would be 2 feet, so then you're only granting another 6 inches to an extent. Well, you'd be granting another 8 inches.
I didn't grab the numbers out of the air. I
Yeah.
didn't make up 32
So,
without.
I mean, I think,
Yeah, 10, yeah, or you could just go to 10% and eliminate the inches. And then it's going to really reflect kind of what's going on in which district. I mean, that's there. Or you can turn it to whichever is lesser. We can change greater to lesser, the lesser of 10% or 32 inches.
like I said, it's hard to imagine, because with our minimum lot standards, it doesn't happen often, especially from like when we're talking about let's say a proposed house is right up and on the minimum side property line, is very rare because of our minimum lot dimension requirements. So it's like they have a big buildable area to put a structure. So I think overall, I mean, especially because it's up to discretion, like I think either 10% or the 32 inches, because and leaving with, I mean, I guess now thinking about it, whichever is greater is fine, because the only one that I was worried about were the 3 individual conditional zoning districts, but their structures are already built, and then if they're trying to add on to it, I guarantee you too, those HOAs are not gonna allow that, so and they're gonna trigger other things that would set in motion, probably not gonna that would probably make it not going to happen.
And I want to pull out the development agreement again, because let's say you've got with your new heritage district, a project that's a little, you know, a little more mass to it. In your development agreement, you can require that they forego their
Flexible.
rights to this. You can say, we won't go with this provision of density if you're going to retain this as well. So you can always ask them, would you be willing to do that in the development agreement? And,
One look at and see an example of this, my property over there, it's on a half acre. So there's limited area within that footprint of that lot. It's in the Martin Heritage District. So mine is a little bit more of a complicated situation when it comes to something like this.
You have to go through the rezoning process, and we
Right, but he was bringing up the Martin Heritage District.
no, they don't.
For the Heritage District, yes, because if you go through it's a requirement of the rezoning. Well, correct, yes, in short, the Heritage District, the provisions we just did, is you can request up to a 10% deviation of the minimum requirements. So,
I'm just saying that because mine is unusual.
yes, and the intent behind that is, once again, it's keeping it within the parameters of 10%. We're not allowing somebody to propose something way off the wall. We're trying to keep it focused on what the intent and everything of the district. And Will, once again, I don't know, and with your specific property, because there's so many different variables, so I can't give you a firm answer.
Just curious, under the circumstances, comes up this close, but is over, is that up for consideration under the circumstances of how unusual the circumstances of the property, the lot, or whatever, to be considered, but gone through a approval or denial process?
I can tell you, based off the standards that we have in the district and what the requirements are for the rezoning, a lot of that's would be figured out before the property's rezoned.
Are that district is, we've talked about whether that's going to be a conditional
It is a conditional.
thing too, if it's conditional, then you can put into the conditions that go with that district. And we haven't gotten to that, that'll appear in Article 8. And, but that's one that you can do, is that you can restrict modifications to 1/2 of those eligible, or some criteria. I'm just making something up right now for an example, to some proportional or something like that through those conditions, and it gets added to the zoning district standards. We can spell that out, the modifications, provided for in Article 14. But we also have modifications that are eligible, because we have them in conditional districts. We also have them in special use permits, where it basically points you back to Article 14. It says those are allowable, and the statute provides for that. Remember in the beginning, I said I was going to put everything in there and let you see what you wanted to, what tools do you say, no, I don't want to even have that in my toolbox. But that does appear in Article 7 under special use permits, that it refers you to here, and it also is addressed in conditional zoning districts in Article 5, that it points you back to this. So it is an eligible thing. We would just need to say so if we were going to take away some of that modification ability. But at the end of the day, you still can always send them straight to the Board of Adjustment. And if they aren't married to it, they'll give it up right away and say, well, never mind if I have to go through all that. And the problem will go away. Then you'll know whether they really needed it or not, or just wanted it. Can I have this? There is in every ordinance. It's not subject to this ordinance. I do have, and we've talked about it when we talked about Article 22, I do have some additional grandparent provisions. They're called non-conforming, okay, which means when they were established, they were there. When they were established, they met the standards in effect at the time, but they no longer meet the standards of a new ordinance. So the new ordinance, say the new ordinance is tougher or more stringent or has higher standards or whatever you want to classify a provision as, then yes, you have those rights. You also have permit choice.
Well, whenever I owned that property not too long, the old man back then told me that if that property burned down, I would not be able to do it.
Well, that's not true under any. The state statute says if it's 50% of the value of a non-conforming building, meaning, let's say that building were built too close to the property line, and the new setback made it a non-conforming or a grandparented or grandfathered or grandmothered building. And let's say a big tree fell on it, and let's say on the tax rolls, the lot was worth $200,000 and the house was worth $87,000 because it was built in 19 whatever, and that to repair it would cost $100,000. Then that exceeds 50% of the 87 because you look at the value of the building, not the value of the land and the building. And so that is state statute, and that is reflected in here. Okay.
That old land I'm talking about, 12 years ago or so.
Doesn't matter what they said to you.
Property was only half an acre instead of 1 acre.
It,
And
okay, he's wrong. That planner's wrong. I don't know if it's a boy or girl, you said him or his or whatever, I don't know. That planner is wrong. Now we're talking about non-conforming lots. The house was not non-conforming. You're talking about what's called a dimensional nonconformity, which is the first part of Article 22. A dimensional nonconformity is a dimensional nonconformity. And that could be a setback, but that could also be a lot size or a lot width. If that lot size or lot width, if that lot was created as a bona fide lot at the time it was created, in other words, it was legitimate, then you have all your development rights on that lot. But you have to meet the new standards for that lot. Let's say it's required now to be an acre and has a 50-foot setback and 220s or something like that, but you've only got a half an acre. Well, you get to build a house on that half an acre, but you still got to meet the 50-foot setback and the 220s and all that regular stuff. But you can build on that lot. They cannot, you can't look, that's called an inverse condemnation when a regulation takes away all reasonable use without compensating you for it. So what that planner told you was wrong. Okay, am I clear?
Before we move on to 22, do you feel like, Hunter, that, that you have the language that you want for the 10% or 32 inches?
I'm good with how it's being proposed.
Whichever is greater or
Okay.
less.
Yeah, I'm good.
I just want to make sure that you're good before we move on. All right, are we, do we feel like we've exhausted 14 and are ready for exhausting 22?
Was there anything in 22, because this is the review, is there anything in 22 that anybody had any questions about or wants to discuss? It is we just did the bottom of page 1, which is dimensional nonconformities. That's what people might call a nonconforming building, meaning what they really mean to say is it's too tall, it's too close to the property line, something like that. But the first part is about lots. If it's a lawfully established lot, when it was established, you have the right to build on it. You just have to meet whatever current other standards there are, setbacks, whatever, height, that thing. Non-conforming uses, that's what's going on in there. So if you've got a pool hall going on in there, and beer drinking and all that stuff for money, and you charge, membership or a fee at the door or whatever, and it's in a residential district, and you stop doing it, that's when the next provision kicks in, non-conforming uses. What happens to that non-conforming use? It was okay when you started, but no longer allowable, but then you stopped. As long as you don't stop, you can keep on rocking with that, with your pool room.
Same thing as in Pineville with regards to auto repair shops. Once they stop being an auto repair shop.
For a certain amount of time.
Right, I think it's 6 months and you can go back.
Well, we've got longer than that in here. We've got 2 years in here. That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going with this. On uses, and that's on page 2, discontinuation of nonconforming uses. We've got 730 days. I do it days, not years, not months, not weeks. I do it in days, something you can really nail down. And if they are making a good faith offer, let's say that we're in a recession and they've had this business for sale, and because it's a slow economy, nothing's moving. The provisions that are in here now, because I've had that asked of me by predominantly elected officials, not planning boards. Well, what happens if the economy slows down? Is 2 years enough, or is 6 months enough, whatever your number is? And so you're looking at language that has that extra piece in there that shows that if they're still making some form of concerted, what we call substantial good faith effort, it's not just sitting there. It's not like the old car with trees growing out of it, and they say, but it's not junk, I'm gonna restore it someday, okay? Not that situation. It's that they are actually doing something. They're doing something for that, to get that use. We're not talking about the building, we're talking about the business that's in that building, whatever's going on, because typically it's a non-conforming use as a business in a residential area, generally speaking. Then the third one in yellow that I pointed out to you is part of my trifecta of complying with the legislative thread in 160D, where the general statute actually reads, we strongly encourage, which means, if we don't do something, they're coming at us with a one-size-fits-all tube sock solution, and tube socks don't actually fit anyone very well, right? And you don't want tube sock solutions, because what they'll normally do is they'll say something in the legislature like, if you don't do this, then this is the solution for you. Unless otherwise addressed it in your ordinance, this is how it's going to be. And they're going to open that gate a little bit. They'll open that gate a little bit, because manufactured homes are a valid thing in certain areas, okay? You might say, well, not here, and that's fine. But we've got the tools and the avenues in here. So if there's one out there, and I think we said in our discussion last month, there was like one in town or something like that. Do you try to wait them out, see if they can get to 100 years, or do you, if they can only afford to just replace it, at least let them do that? So you're not letting this situation get worse. It just may get prolonged. Because I've seen some pretty old mobile homes sit right where they are for decades. Stop. Stop. State law does not let us pick out a house and say, this is a nice house, this is a good house, this is the way to design a house, all these things. If it's a 10, 12, 14,000 square foot mansion that everybody thinks is beautiful, or these other people think is awful, or whether it's a little bitty house, it is a house. Senate Bill 25 cleaned that up in 2013 long session.
I thought it had to be, HUD,
Had to be,
I think that, from what I understand, tiny houses are actually considered RVs.
no, well, hold on.
And
Here we go.
especially if
We
they
just
are
went-
not, HUD regulated, like if they don't meet HUD standards?
There's a third bucket. Anybody want to go ahead and guess on that one? Because there's 3 buckets of tiny houses. Let's suppose that I decide, because I am actually well, I'm not in my truck, they're in my truck. I'm actually building a 1-bedroom right now, spec house near the North Carolina Research Campus, 576 square feet, $325,000, if you'd like it. Modern, very nice, blends right in with the environment over there. So, anyway, I'm glad you asked that, because what it tells me is where everybody's heads are. His head was over in houses. So if it's a house, not a manufactured home, if it's a house, whether it's built in a factory and delivered on a truck, or whether it is built one stick at a time, it's a standard house built to the residential code for 1 and 2 family dwellings. That's the name of the code. It doesn't matter how big it is. We cannot regulate that size. Minimum housing code sort of dances around that subject to make sure you're not putting 20 people in a shoebox, okay? To make sure that there's a little bit of space for those people, but from a zoning standpoint, we can't touch that. The other side of the spectrum is, let's suppose that somebody wants to make this little tiny house and they want to put it on a trailer. They're going to take an old utility trailer or a construction equipment trailer, and they're going to make it into one, and they're going to drag it where they want to. Maybe I work construction, and I'm going to set it up in a campground or whatever. So, tiny houses are a catchphrase, sort of like Uber is for taxi or Airbnb is for B&B. It's really just a little catchphrase. It's not a thing. If it's on a trailer, it falls into one of 2 categories. You're correct on one of them. If it's made in a factory with a chassis and sold as a manufactured home, like you might go back and look at the park models, if you've been around the beachy or some mountain communities where there'll be small manufactured homes that are called park model. My mom lived in a park model, one beautiful, elegant, 1-bedroom, little bitty manufactured home. HUD standard applies. Let's suppose that it doesn't meet those standards and it's put on a little trailer. Guess what it becomes?
RV.
An RV. It's a camper. So,
what is an
it's not a
RV?
new thing. It's not a new thing.
What if it's stick built on the trailer?
It's still an RV, or unless you meet the HUD standard, it would be a manufactured home. If it's got a chassis, it's either going to be an RV or manufactured home. Doesn't matter who built it and where they built it, or how they built it. So everybody gets, so little gold stars for you three.
So park models, because I actually almost bought a park model and was going to put it in a county that will not be named, not this county. And I was told that it was still an RV and I had to apply to be an RV park, and I'd have to move it every 30 days.
Was it a HUD standard?
Yes.
Okay. Then some
But they're built on chassis and they're delivered on chassis, and like you don't take them off of.
Some jurisdictions have started putting dates out there. They would say, how old was it?
It was brand new.
Brand new. Then you could go into, and this is the tools you're going to see in your toolbox, it can go into either a manufactured home park, or if you've got manufactured home zoning, it could be set up, but then it has to be set up to permanent installation standards, which means you're going to be killing the axle and setting it up like a permanent thing. Or it can go into a campground and is not considered a permanent residence as long as it's moved every so often. So there's this little matrix of situations that define tiny houses. And so when I hear planners on the listserv, we have this listserv wonderful thing where all the planners ask really dumb questions. And they'll say, what do y'all do about tiny homes? There's no such thing. You can call it that, but it's really a small house. Or it's a small mobile home, or it's a small RV is what really is. We
So-
treat them the same as those three categories.
So does 160 then, does 160 now define that so that you can't argue with it? I mean, I know that we don't allow them here, but, or,
I mean, it's always kind of been clear in the state statutes to an extent.
Yeah.
It just
It's a
depends
house.
on, it's depend on the municipality on how, one, how dated their ordinances are, or two, how risky they wanted to get.
It's like chasing trends. If somebody comes up with a trendy term and that term suddenly takes on or hijacks a meaning, we don't create a new category in our use table. You follow me? So I may speak to it and say something in my language, which you'll see when we get to that will say, including, and it will use those terms like tiny house and all that, so that it's clear that it's just lumped in with these other things. It's just a small version. It's either a small house, it's a small manufactured home, or it's a small RV. That's what it is.
160D did specify the definition of dwelling and expand on that to an extent on what that includes.
And they took away family from that.
Yes, because I have seen ordinances in towns that I used to work for, and this was during the kind of transition to 160D that regulated the difference between modular and manufactured. They couldn't, I mean, well, let me phrase that. They could regulate manufactured, but you can't, if modular is built to North Carolina Building Code standards, it's the same thing as a residential stick-built dwelling, and if you permit that, you have to permit, I mean,
All houses that are built in this state right now technically are modular. Because you don't get just a load of lumber and start working. You get trusses that are factory made. You get all kind of wall components that are factory made. Almost every house now has some components. I'm not talking about cabinetry. That's really kind of furnishings, but yep, I said that, kind of furnishings, but you know what I mean? The house itself, you might buy all kinds of components, or the contractors do, that are pre-assembled, pre-cut, and there are advantages to that because they can do it in better
Less
weather
waste,
situation.
yeah.
I was in a factory. Now, this is a fairly expensive product. It's a company in Asheville that makes homes that are kits, basically, but they install them, and most of them are octagonal, and they're built around a single structure in the center, and and their biggest clients right now are people that buy like islands, and they'll do like 20 of these or 10 of these on this island, and you can get all the different sizes. Imagine all this, any ring size you want. And I went on a factory tour there earlier this year, and the fellow that took myself and an associate of mine on the tour showed us a small dumpster. I've never seen a dumpster that was about the size of this thing right here. A whole dumpster that was about this size. And it was at the end of a little belt. And he said, take a look at that. And in that dumpster, it was about this full of little pieces of corners and things of wood. And I'm talking about mostly little pieces. There wasn't anything in there this big. And he said, that is the waste from one house. So it eliminates waste because they use computers to now say, okay, I need all these boards, but I need this other little piece. And it knows that, on the board that goes over here in the bedroom on the floor, we're going to have enough left over to put this piece up here in the attic bracing over the crawl space. So modular factory is not a bad thing. It's the abuses of modular that are really the ducks, the manufactured, that has created the tension with modular. Manufactured home manufacturers, what we used to call mobile homes, have tried to cross into the modular world to skirt zoning, and they've created some of that tension. So I try to keep them cleanly separated. There's manufactured homes and there's everything else.
Okay, how about this? Container homes.
Same thing. If it's built to that residential standard, if it can satisfy the building code on that, then there it is. We can't touch that.
can't regulate aesthetics.
We can't regulate
No.
taste either. If it can be the ugliest house you've ever seen.
Now, that's why we did the Heritage District as a conditional district.
Right.
It still has to be mutually agreed upon, but then that does give us a little bit of the tools to cater or
Well, I'm going to spoil some surprises that come later because we're digging into so many deep topics and all we were doing is sort of stepping into nonconformities. So, but let me go ahead and spill some beans on the secrets to this. One of them I told you about in the very beginning. I said, because of the 160D and I was actually on the phone with the top litigator in the state right now that's suing towns, okay, because the money's there. And he spit right off the top of his tongue the chapter number. It's in GS 6 something that makes all that liability there. He just spit it right out because that's how he gets paid. And I talked to you guys about how we protect ourselves from that exposure, that financial exposure as a town, and how important it is to shift the key decision to the legislative process, which is planning board recommendation, governing board voting on a rezoning. So if you can reject a rezoning without explanation. You can't reject a site plan or something like that without showing where does it not comply. But you can reject a rezoning. That's why it's important, like you say, that conditional zoning to get the Heritage District, so it requires them to demonstrate, and then the governing board can just say no if they don't feel good about it. That's a key component of how all of this actually works well. Now, to go with that, the districts that I bring forward as by right districts are generally safe districts. They're going to have your lot sizes and things of that nature that everybody's happy with. The tool in the toolbox that gives you the ability to say, hey, this is a project that'll be perfect for our Heritage District, is using that overlay district approach or either conditional district approach. I prefer to have kind of a 1-2 punch on these so there's at least 2 decisions in the path. And you put all these standards in that district, and you don't go out and just zone anything that category, and in fact you even stipulate that that can only be applied by an application from the property owner, and there's a reason for that, rather than the town initiating it. If the property owner requests it, they are agreeing to all these extra standards that can get into houses. See, we can't just impose home standards, but we can set standards for homes in districts where they may say, well, we want that because we want more density, or we want to be closer to this, or whatever it is that they want. So you're trading that thing that they want for the quality that you want. Okay? And so I'm jumping the gun on a little bit on what's going to start showing up in Article 8 on how to play that strategy to get what you're after when somebody comes knocking on the door with something they're after. So
Well, maybe you and I could, maybe Rick would humor the two of us if we have questions about other projects outside of this later. So we can move on and let everybody else go. Because I have a question and I'll ask him after.
Because technically, we're in non-conforming uses right now, Article 2, or non-conformities, Article 2, which is the grandparent clause. People say, is there a grandparent clause? There it is. Article 22, the grandparent clause. That's it, right there. Article 20, any other questions about 22?
No, like,
Is it on 22? Nonconformities?
Somewhat, it's just a general question.
Okay.
I can ask that.
Chair, I'll,
I can ask that.
does it have to do with something that might actually happen in Marvin or something that
Yeah.
you're interested? Okay, yeah, I would go ahead and do it
Well,
then.
for me personally.
Oh.
No, because
that's up to the chair.
Yeah, why don't we ask him if you'll tolerate us asking you personal like a personal question
If it's got a
afterwards.
personal thing and it's not impacting policy, it really should be on the side
On the
after
side,
the
yeah.
meeting. If
Is
if it's affecting Marvin as a whole, this is the venue for it.
But if,
Not much,
if you think it, if
About
you
30
think it could
31
apply, then
inches.
ask it.
about 30 inches.
But it has something to do with policy, because it's part Waxaw, part Marvin.
Ooh,
Multi-jurisdictional thing. Oh, boy.
It's not part Waxhaw, it's part Union County, right? It's just part of unincorporated.
Yeah, it's unincorporated, the road is, to get to my road, my house, is unincorporated Waxaw. My home, unincorporated Union County.
Yeah.
Unincorporated.
Yeah, you might have a zip code that says Waxhaw. That has no bearing on jurisdiction. If you're inside the town limits, you're inside. If you're out, you're in the county's jurisdiction, unless there's extraterritorial jurisdiction. And zip codes don't mean anything regulatory. Yeah.
Yeah, if your whole property boundary is within the village of Marvin, then you have to, whatever you do on that property, if it's subdivided or not, it has to comply with our ordinance. Yeah.
Now, if
So-
it's split between two jurisdictions, there are provisions in the statute to help you deal with that.
That's good to know.
Okay?
yeah. And my question about subdividing was unsatisfactorily answered Tuesday night about the interior lot being subdivided that I'm pretty sure their HOA does not allow, but you said by law you had to approve it because they submitted it. You don't get into HOA stuff, so, yeah.
No.
That's all concern of HOA to deal with that still.
Yeah, I just thought that was,
The only other way to look at it is that if it's part of, I mean, you can use the term common plan of development and looking at old subdivision or new subdivisions and what the intent of the major subdivision was, but it's like that specific one, like it's not, it's a one-off. It's the same as like, well, it's like these older ones that were minorly or majorly subdivided, depending on how you look at it. It just, HOA or not. I mean, if you come to me with a subdivision and the lot complies with the ordinance, I don't care what, I mean, I will let you know, I know what your HOA says, or I think I know, but I don't have any jurisdiction over that.
yeah.
Article 23?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Article 23. On the first page, I had yellowed that the village manager, it would be authorized by this draft to appoint you and your replacements in the future when you retire and all that. Is that
Ripe old
correct,
age of
or is
80.
it something that would go to village council?
It's the manager.
Okay, so that's why I've got that yellow in there, because that's just a question as to what the preference is on that. The other one is over on page 6, and I think our discussion when I pointed it out before was the numbers. How big of fines do you want for your, what I'll call your average violations? We've got some special fines in things like landscape for cutting heritage trees, for protecting certain things that you will get to look at in a future meeting. But this is for your normal stuff, normal violations. $100 for the first citation, second citation for the same offense, it jumps to 3, third and subsequents are $500, which means basically in 3 days, you can be up to $800 in debt to the town. And that's where it starts. That's right. Each day is a separate violation.
So each
Once you start penalties, normally you're going to send a warning letter, you're going to get their attention, and they're going to go, oh, I'm sorry, and they're going to fix it, and everything's okay, there's no fines. But it's when they ignore you, throw you, show you their middle finger and walk around on you, that you're going to say, okay, I'm going to issue a notice of violation, and they're going to start, your fines are going to start on this day. And that's intended to get the situation corrected, not to make money for your budget. The best way to get people's attention is in their wallet. You want to get their attention, get it in their wallet.
This is actually less than what these used to be
No.
$500. Well, that was what, 12 years ago?
Well, $500 a day, but hits on the third day, then it's $500 a day.
Each subsec-
I have 11, about 12 years.
From
But
Marvin?
I'm pretty sure that's a different offense. In our current general offense fine, the structure is 50, 100, and 500, currently.
Yeah.
I like the 103.5, I mean, that's fine. I think what you're referencing is dealing with tree protection. Like, trust me, this is why we're doing this, is because our current ordinance literally has a bunch of random stuff that was thrown in there that then conflicts with your general enforcement penalty and all this other stuff, and,
This cleans it all up.
yep.
So I'm concluding, Mr. Owens, that you are a habitual troublemaker. Is that what it is? Wow. Have you been stopped for speeding through the middle of town in the middle of the night yet? Don't answer. Okay. Okay. Any questions about this? This is basically creates Hunter's position, defines their duties, qualifies him, sets in place the violations and things, which he probably is going to delegate actual enforcement to an enforcement officer, or do you do it yourself?
I currently do it myself.
Because that's not a good idea.
I-
It's a better idea to have a code enforcement officer that sort of goes out and gets the cat by the scruff of the neck and brings him in and says, okay, you need to
I
meet
thought we had one.
with Hunter.
We didn't renew that contract. We have very minimal nuisance-related code enforcement violations. We have, I would say, anywhere from like 1 to 3, maybe zoning violations a year, if that. So that's why we cut that contract. But the intent is that as we continue to grow, I will have somebody under me, and they will be mainly the enforcement person.
Yeah, okay. So that's the way this is set up, is for everything in this ordinance flows to him. Okay?
And is this is just for like planning, zoning, and
All that
subdivision
stuff.
administration? Okay.
Yeah, all that
So,
stuff.
For things like, you know, someone's abandoned their house and their yard is,
Yeah, that's
growing up
the
above there.
nuisance, tall grass, that goes under a code enforcement person too. What we normally recommend is that you have a code enforcement officer that handles all of the violation type of stuff. So it might be tall grass, junk car, dilapidated building, abandoned situation, and it also might be a discontinuation of use or something like that, because normally, if you've got one violation, you probably got several.
yeah. Well,
And-
where is that? Is that in this?
It's in
That
our-
other stuff is elsewhere because of the way the statutes are written.
Yeah, it's in our code of ordinances under general regulations.
But what normally happens is they might cite for all the different things, because sometimes that even gets them in the house and they find out that, yeah, we've needed to get in this house. We've had police officers call our code enforcement officers and ask them to do complain about tall grass, and the next thing they know, they're busting on drugs.
Yeah.
And so forth and so on. So that's kind of how that works. It all kind of goes together, but it's better to have somebody to issue the violations so that you sort of have this
Separate.
heavy, and then the person that's going to help them get the problem solved and go forward.
I have a mechanical question. Part of it says per day and part of it says per citation. Does he have to like issue a citation every day? or
Yep.
Yeah.
He can't group them together?
Yes, you can group them together. You can do that.
This citation's for the last 20 days or whatever.
Yeah, you can group them together. Like you may go out, you may issue a notice of violation of a problem, and then you may drive back by it 3 days later, and there it is, and so you'll issue a citation for each of those individual events, because each day that it carries on is a separate violation. So that's how you get their attention. Then the governing board can, let's say, and I had one in a little town not too far from here about 10 or 12 years ago. and I think I told you this, about 60 grand in penalties, and is what they had accumulated. And so they kept trying to dodge the bullet, not thinking the town would take them seriously. And so we reached a point to where it was time to take it to court, not to prove that they were guilty, but to prove that they owed money, okay, and get a judgment, and ask the judge to place a lien on the property. And when that happened, they were saluting the planning department and begging for mercy. And so I went to the manager and I said, you know, you at least need to determine, before you take this to your governing board, determine what the town has in cost associated with this case. So they figured all that out, attorney fee, staff time, code enforcement time, all the actions, and they figured it was like $13,000 if you equated everybody's time to it. And because we'd have meeting after meeting after meeting, follow-up inspections over and over and over, all that kind of stuff, and took it to the governing board, and the governing board knocked it down to the cost. And boy, you know, was that violator happy. Appealing the fee, separate than, they were just begging for mercy. They had already exhausted their appeal process, which was to try to argue that they were not in violation. You know, they can do that directly with the code enforcement officer, where they sit down with the code enforcement officer, in which case the administrator of the ordinance would also be present to discuss the notice of violation. And they'd already done that, and they basically flipped us off like, well, I'm not fooling with that. And what it was a nice neighborhood, and they brought a bunch of construction equipment in. We're running a trucking, hauling, gravel grading business out of a backyard in a nice neighborhood. I'm like, why would you buy a $700,000 house and put all this stuff in the backyard? But people do what they do. The complaint came in from a neighbor whose daughter was getting married, and they were wanting to do it in the backyard. And they're like, we can't do this. So that's where it started.
Well, you said I was a troublemaker, so I'm going to explain.
Pardon me?
You said I was a troublemaker, so I'm going to explain a little bit of mine. It was a fire I had in my...
No, I asked if you were a troublemaker.
Oh, okay, well, I'm going to let you know. I had a fire in it was actually an outbuilding, which was a man cave.
Okay.
Okay? The fire was contained inside of the building. It was one of those smoldering types of fires. And I was going through the insurance to get everything taken care of, and then had to do the inventory with all the contents. And I had a certain amount of items that were salvaged from that fire, placed in an open shed underneath.
And you got a citation?
Got a citation because I had no fence in the back. I do now. But the citation was for was it stockpile?
Junk and debris or something?
Stockpile, whatever, underneath it. And I was trying to get through all of it. But what was interesting was it was only visible from the road into the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was private road.
So?
Yeah.
So,
So?
but the ordinance basically, from what I read then, said public roads.
Well, then you should have appealed that.
I should have.
Yeah.
But
You might have, and you would have gone to the Board of Adjustment first, and if you didn't like what the Board of Adjustment says, then you appeal to Superior Court. And Superior Court doesn't look at it independently. They look back to determine if the Board of Adjustment followed the evidence or ignored the evidence, or disregarded the evidence in such a way that they were acting beyond what the evidence proved.
I just got a letter for $500 a day. If I don't get it done, I guess it was 2 weeks.
Next time you'll get you a storage unit,
Well,
just put all your stuff in the
let's just say
storage unit.
that did get me motivated. So I got taken care of very quickly, but either way.
So any issues with the fines that I've got in here? Okay, all right, moving right along. That kind of concludes, everyone, that concludes the review of those articles that were previously introduced. So now, he just disappeared, and I was going to ask him a question. I think he went to the restroom. Now we're going to talk about, if you remember in the reading guide, we have this next category, which I call state and federal mandates or equivalent. It's more than boring. If you thought that last batch that we've been through over the last few meetings was boring, this one is the really boring stuff. And I'm dead serious. Article 18, the only thing we can change is our name, the community ID, who appoints or who serves as the floodplain administrator, whether there's 2 feet of freeboard, 3 feet of freeboard, or 4 feet of freeboard, and then the actual historical date upon which you first entered the program. That is literally the range of flexibility you have in 35 pages if you want to remain eligible for the flood insurance program in your town. So you might come up and say, well, we don't like this about, LP tanks on campers. Well, that's part of the state's, basically, they're passing us a federal program mandate because what it has to do with is eligibility for insurance. So it's not very subjective at the local level. The council can't just pick and choose what they like and don't like. That list of, I think it's about 6 or 7 things, is literally the extent of what we can change in there. Again, your name, community ID number, the amount of freeboard. Oh, there was one other thing. The dates that you originally adopted your ordinance, which is just historical fact. The one thing I left out was the number of inspections. Do you want 1, 2, or the 3 certificates on the surveys? I recommend the 3, which is what's in the model, because the earlier you catch the problem, the better. Some places will say, just get the final one and let that be that. Well, they've already built the house. What if there is a problem? Isn't it cheaper to catch it on paper before it's done? So I recommend the first 2 as well. First one's on paper when there's nothing done. Second one's after the foundation is done. Third one's after the house is finished.
This might not be exactly what this is talking about, but in another town's ordinance that I read, they were basically saying, we don't, if like one neighbor changes the direction of, flood runoff.
Stormwater runoff.
Or,
That's in your stormwater ordinance, which comes up in 19.
Okay, then I won't ask that now.
Yeah, flood is.
Yeah, I thought this was like something that's like, because on an article, which one was it? Alterations of a water course.
Yeah. Yep, you'll
So
have
that's
alterations.
That's different, so like a channel of,
When you're changing the channel, that's usually because you're grading, okay? That's usually when you're grading, so, and the Corps of Engineers gets involved in that too. Now, the funny thing about the federal mandates is they all have one common denominator, besides being federal. And sometimes they get passed through the state to us, sometimes straight to us, but generally speaking, they're about water, all of them. And so they're kind of compartmentalized. You've got soil sediment erosion control. You've got stormwater, which is kind of post-construction after you're finished with the project. The soil sediment erosion control is during construction. And so there are actually 2 different articles in here, okay, which we don't have 21, by the way. I didn't have 21, if those were printed out. We're in 18 right now, and, 20, not 21, 20. I've got 18 and 19, but not 20.
Everybody should have 20. If you don't have a copy, I can get you one.
Do y'all have 20? Okay, I didn't get 20.
yes.
I got, so we should have 18, 19, and 20. They all 3 are water related. So flood damage prevention is about avoiding damage. Now, later on, I'm gonna go ahead and give you this, I'm gonna spoil a surprise. Later on, Article 16, when we get into subdivision, we've got some tools in there that basically make this article almost unimportant, except for existing situations where somebody might want to put a building on a farm down by the creek. That's about it. Because in new development, what we're going to be talking about is whether you even allow the lot lines into the floodplain on new home sites. I'm not talking about dividing 50 acres into 3 parcels for the kids. Of course, it can go down to the creek and all that, but I'm talking about creating lots and subdivisions where homeowners are gonna walk in the door, buy the lovely house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, whatever, and then find out they've got floodplain down at the back and they have to buy flood insurance, and because they have a mortgage, and then they go down there and start trimming and mowing in areas that are also stream buffers, because your stream buffers and your floodplains almost always are together. You don't usually see one without the other. And the same goes for wetlands. They're almost always associated with those conditions. So we've got provisions coming in 16 that I want you to evaluate that basically set people up for success, not set people up for failure. Awesome. Thank you very much. So,
Will we address the like whole split heel issue in those?
so if you want to read 18, knock yourself out. It is really good and boring. It's a model that we don't play with. I actually
You said it's
improved.
like federally mandated.
If you want to have the availability in your town limits of flood insurance, which is a federal requirement if you have a mortgage on property that extends into a federally regulated floodplain, yes.
In a federally regulated floodplain.
They're
but,
defined by the
like,
federal
I know that we've
government.
got, I've seen some like 100-year flood.
That's
floodplains.
it.
Like there's like a property
That's
actually
it.
down from your house that has a 100-year flood. They've
Now,
actually turned it into like a farm though.
In
so-
here, it will be referred to as the 1%, which means it has a 1% probability, which means it has a 1% chance of occurring in any given period of time, which you can almost assuredly assume is going to happen once every 100 years, but it might happen twice in 1 year.
Is this also considering the different zones?
Yeah, the different, all that, yep, all that stuff. And then you've also got the, if you want to go to a fun and exciting website, and you love to do that, FRIS, FRIS.gov, FRIS.
Oh, here it is, right here, under map repository.
There you go. That website, North Carolina was one of the first states in the country to adopt that. That's an electronic flood mapping. And it's because of our tropical storm frequencies that we get a lot of flooding, particularly down east in the state. And so North Carolina, among a few others, was one of the very first to receive that from the federal government. It was basically handed to us. Back in the old days, they would send us about once a year when they were cleaning out boxes, about once a year, they'd send us new flood maps, and they'd usually send us about 30 sets of about, I don't know, 10 or 20 or 30 per town. So you might get a box and a half or 2 boxes and suddenly delivered to town hall from FEMA, which is now under the Department of Homeland Security. So that's who we are answering to on this, but it flows up from us through the Department of Public Safety in Raleigh, and then to FEMA over to Homeland Security. So that's where this is coming from. That FRIS site is wonderful. You can go to your area and it will show you the 1%, AKA 100-year, and 0.2%, AKA 500-year areas, and you can literally click on it. We used to have to interpolate the flood elevation because creeks aren't flat. Floodplains actually are plains, but they're not like lakes where they're level. They actually are at a slope following the stream. And so on this end of your property, it might be 650 feet above sea level. On this end of the property, it might be 648.2 feet above sea level. And you can click exactly where you want to do your house and see, or your building or your barn or your shed, and they're cracking down on enforcing that. The Dodd-Frank Act, which you'll hear me cite from time to time, adopted back around 2009, 10, something like that, following the recession, rolled out restrictions on the financial industry, which includes mortgages and includes insurance, saying mitigate your risk, get these risks under control. We can't be sending all this money out everywhere. We got to roll that back. And so the Dodd-Frank Act basically also said to the federal government to monitor these. Have you had a, what's called a CAV since you've been here? A CAV, a CAV? Terry Fox would be your guy out of Raleigh.
Name sounds familiar. but
CAV
I-
is a community assistance visit, and that's where he comes in and will see any permit that you issued that touches a floodplain even that much. And then you'll get in the car with Terry and you'll go out, which is an old retired police car, and go out and ride around and look at those. And then you'll see somebody's got a utility trailer with some motorcycles parked down by the creek, and he'll tell you, I want that out of there, because we don't want to pay an insurance claim next time we have a big downpour. So that's what this is about. That's the mandate.
The website can also determine the elevation of the property, like if you have.
Exactly.
Property is like, just a corner is in.
That's exactly right.
And if it's at a certain elevation, it can fall within not needing or requiring flood insurance too. I know that. I have property, water.
Right.
And that's a very useful.
It's a very useful website. So that's what it is. Enjoy the read. I'm going to need, I'll be sending this to Milton Carpenter, works with Terry, and I'll be sending this draft. I think I've already sent it to Aaron, actually, and Milton both, to get your dates of your original stuff here, because we even now in these ordinances have to show the date that the town first became a participant in the program, the date the county first got involved in the program, the date you first adopted your first ordinance about it, the date the county adopted its first ordinance about it, the date the first maps were done, all that stuff, dating back to like 1970s and 80s generally. So not too far back, but far enough. So that's what that's about. Now, and we'll review this on your next agenda, any questions that you have or any further discussions you want to have, but trust me on that one. The big question is going to be the number of inspections and certificates you want. I recommend all three, because it actually is designed to save your taxpayer from not catching a mistake when it, ahead of time. I got that going on right now. I was on the phone in your parking lot with a surveyor about that subject, about
Looks
one
like
that
most
the
of
house is built and is going to have to be torn down.
There's a lot to this Loma stuff too.
Right. Now, right, I've got that going on in a town too, and I've got an industrial project expansion because of a Lomar. It took them 3 years to get it because they went out and they dropped a pipe in a creek and covered it up without approvals, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers drug them through the mud. Took 3 years to get that Lomar approved, and we just got the Lomar approved. Now we can go on with, it's a major industry that was wanting to do a big parking lot on part of their property for tractor trailers. And they went out and just, got Johnny Boy to take his tractor down there and drop the pipe in the ditch, and he, saved $200, they thought, from letting him do it instead of getting it done right. I don't know what they were thinking, but the federal government will punish you, well, the state DOT will too, will punish you when you get out of bounds, just by dragging their feet. Article 19. Article 19 is something that all of you have memorized already, I'm sure. The yellow is new. The rest of Article 19 is what's in your current ordinance now. So we're not changing anything except what needs to be changed to adapt it into this new UDO. The biggest thing being the language at the beginning that sets this thing in play. I felt like that you always need to start out with why are you doing what you're doing if you're going to defend that policy. And so that's why I added that more robust purpose provision. Okay? Otherwise, it kind of started where you see 19.3. It sort of jumped right into the thou shalts.
Do you have any issue or thoughts on us still referencing the Charlotte Mecklenburg Stormwater Manual?
Not really. Not really. That's defensible.
Okay.
That's justifiable. There's no reason for you to reinvent that wheel if you're, it works well. So this is fine.
But we do, the question that our attorney has brought up is the enforceable means within that manual.
Is the what?
Basically, since that's Charlotte Mecklenburg and we still manage our own stormwater to an extent, is the anything that in that ordinance that we are trying to maybe enforce is
Well-
not potentially legally fully enforceable.
The one thing that I would say that let me look back at the language on that very quickly for a second, because one thing that you can always do that you may not have done, there it is. It's on the first page and about the middle. Yeah, this does the trick. I'll show you what the trick is, in my opinion. Now, I am not an attorney. I am not giving you legal advice. The village attorney is your attorney that's going to give you the legal advice. But here is my professional advice as a consultant, as a professional consultant on this topic. If you read the very first sentence of 19.3-1,
Hereby adopts and incorporates.
you are adopting and incorporating those provisions as if they were written herein. In other words, if you just said, reference it, then it means it's something that they adopted. If you're adopting it, you are adopting it, and you need to defend it as if it were appearing right here in this document.
And how do you know if they've even made updates to it?
Pardon me? That's one of the challenges. I mean, the manual is the manual, and manuals are typically not, and that's not a bad problem, because technical manuals like that are treated a little bit differently. Let me give you an example. Outside of stormwater, I'm going to step out of that for a minute. I'm going to step into something that everybody can identify with, because stormwater is a little more complicated. Let's suppose that the DOT mix for asphalt, which used to be called I-1 and I-2, is what you put in your ordinance, that streets here have to be done to that standard with I-1 and I-2. And then DOT stops using I-1 and I-2 and starts specifying 9.1 or 9.2S, okay, which is what they did. That's why we put it in a manual, so we can just change the detail without it being a big deal. Why do you need to go through the process of amending the ordinance when it's just an industry standard that has modified and you can't get 1 and 2 anymore? That's kind of like saying that you're going to bid out police cars and they all have to be no older than the latest model of the 1931 Model A Ford. It's just not available. So we typically don't worry about that, and that's one of the reasons it references it as a manual. We've also put a manual in yours that you'll be seeing later. It will be the Town of Marvin Technical Standards and Specifications Manual. You already have stuff, but we're going to be looking at that stuff, and I have, and combining some of your old stuff with some stuff that you need to make it a complete manual. And if you change a standard in there that is really not a policy on growth, but it's just a construction material type or construction specification type standard, then it doesn't need to go through formality. So I think it depends on that manual, whether that manual's got a lot of policy or if it's really just design standards.
That's how I've always interpreted as we are incorporating their design standards.
Yeah, because you've got your procedures in here.
Yeah.
And that's what's really appealable.
My question
So I
about,
think you're okay.
My question about 19 is that it looks to be primarily geared towards new development.
It is.
Well, so that other county that shall not be named, we had a neighbor redirect stormwater.
It's a civil issue.
Right, and that's how they actually state it, is that you'll make reasonable blah, 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 but one neighbor has to sue the other and he completely flooded the other neighbor's yard.
You can
so,
also
like,
complain to that jurisdiction if they did improvements without proper permitting. So if they went out and redirected this water, that's a civil matter. But if they went out and did development, if they disturbed area, they redirected the flow of water in violation of the local ordinance, that's an ordinance violation. So you may have both. Damages, I'm not an attorney, I can't give you legal advice, but you may have damages resulting from the personal injury of it, but you also may have a valid violation that you're essentially turning them in on that is enforceable by the county.
if they actually enforce anything, but they don't, so. All right, moving on, sorry. So do we have to even address in this, like, is there anything in here talking about just stating that we don't,
No, because there's been case law, like, basically, because we've had issues with this before, and if it is something that an individual property owner has done within their means without having to get a permit, if it's planting stuff or burning, I mean, depending on the significance of it, if they are significantly negatively impacting an adjoining property owner's property, it's a civil matter.
Yeah, you'll have thresholds on what triggers the application of these. So let's bounce to 20 for just a second, and I think that will clear up the muddy water is the wrong phrase to use about 20, but 20 is also about that, clearing up muddy water. What I'm doing in 20, because you don't do your own soil sediment erosion control. Does the county do it or does the state?
State.
Okay.
Our engineer inspects, but all permits are through the state.
Right, the permitting goes through the state. Now, so we're sort of putting together this little trifecta of the three big water things. One is development in floodplains. One is post-construction stormwater, which is cleaning the water and phasing the release of the water that leaves your property after the development is complete. This third one is capturing sediment from the water that results from disturbance of construction activity. So 20 actually happens a little bit before 19 does in the construction sequence. Okay? This is about those temporary sediment basins that you see and all that silt fence that you see, that black fence or orange fence that you see around the construction sites that's capturing the silt from that runoff. You'll still see red water getting into the creek in this part of the state. That turbidity, as it's referred to in the water quality civil engineering world, that turbidity or color in the water is not typically a big problem other than it looks bad. It looks bad, okay? The sediment in that water, that storm water that's coming off a construction site, is what they want to capture. That sediment causes harm, damage, erosion by washing out other things. It's abrasive. It fills in, it can clog pipes, it can cause streams to change their course and everything else. That's what this is about, capturing sediment. The reason that I'm bringing you Article 20, and for those of you that will take a look at this, you'll notice that I couldn't stop short of using a second piece of paper. It's as brief as I can make it, but what it does is it reaches over and it fish hooks the state program, because right now the state's doing yours. So it's not a town thing. The state's doing yours. It's not a town thing. but I fish hook it into the UDOs for a simple reason. You're doing your own stormwater though, right?
You talking post-construction?
No, yeah, you're post-construction?
No,
If it-
state. Well, they're locally administered, but the permits are held by the HOAs.
That's what I mean,
Yeah,
but it's locally administered.
well,
The village engineer's reviewing all that stuff
correct.
and
But-
signs off on them, right?
Signs off on the plans. If a developer goes for post-construction, they file for the post-construction permit with the state.
Okay,
And
Got
then it's turned over to the HOAs. The HOAs are supposed to certify to the state each year that it's properly being maintained, blah, blah, blah.
okay. So you're doing a good bit of post-construction reviews, but you're not touching this. Sediment, soil sediment erosion control. They deal strictly with,
It's still, sedimentation erosion control is still reviewed during the construction document phase by staff, i.e.
Okay.
village engineer.
well, this fish hooks the state program, the state rules into you, and here's the reason this is important. Because who does enforcement on,
The state.
see?
Like I said, our engineer goes out and routinely inspects. If he sees a violation, then we tell the developer, but if the
Right.
violation still exists, the state's gonna have to be the one that
And
comes.
typically, that's on the soil sediment erosion control side, not the
Yeah.
post-development side. Now, here's the reason that this is important, is, and I heard what you said, he tells the state. Here's the problem. Murphy, the law firm, Murphy and Murphy, that did Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it possibly, if it can possibly go wrong, it probably will, has a South Charlotte zip code address. So we know that rascal's around here somewhere. The point is when it rains, the propensity or the probability or the likelihood of it raining roughly around 5 o'clock is pretty high in North Carolina, right? And at least 1 out of 5, 20% chance it's going to occur on Friday around 5 o'clock. And so we're going to get a call. I'm a reenactment actor on the side. We're going to get a call from Ms. Williams, who says, oh, this project next door has got all this red dirt washing in. It's raining like crazy, and it's coming into our carport, and it's doing this, and it's doing that. And when they call town hall, because they pay their taxes, right? We have 2 choices. Do we tell them, thank you for calling us, we'll look into it right away, or that's not our jurisdiction, you need to call the state. Then you hang up. By then, it's 5:01 on a Friday. So this gives you enough of a fish hook for your person to issue a stop work order or do something. Do something rather than just tell that citizen they need to go to the state. You may use it, you may not use it. We'll call it a freebie that I toss in there, okay? That I think just makes sense to be able to demonstrate to your citizens that when they toss you the ball, you're not going to just deflect them to some other agency. You're going to take it in, and then you might deflect it. It sounds like you're already kind of doing that, if you have the engineer go out and look, and then the engineer communicates with the state.
Well,
But
he
this
can
would
be-
also give you some enforceability.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Oh, I thought you were going to ask me a question.
Is there anything that is required by Gilbert to have detention pond?
That's permanent, that's 19.
Well, they're going to release that area or that lot where that pond is located.
Oh, so it was a 20, it was a soil sediment erosion control construction phase. Yeah, you can do that.
But I'm asking is there any requirement for them to notify the planner or the town once they have gotten notice from the state that lot will be released for the town to go and inspect it if they're going to have to prepare it for?
The state does the inspections and will release if the basin's secured.
So you have no idea about any of it?
Well, he'll know about it when they come to get a permit to build the house. But it'll be a lot that's been restored. Because usually that happens, it'll be the last lot on where the street dips down low, that's where they'll put the basin, maybe it's a couple of lots. And then once because your soil sediment erosion control has to be sized for everything being torn up. Your permanent stormwater is only sized for what your impervious areas are basically sending to them. So quite often, your permanent stormwater detention, retention system is smaller than your temporary system, which is your soil sediment erosion control.
So those lots, or like say there's
If they meet the standards of the state,
have a retention pond.
no, not if they meet the standards, right. Not if they meet the standards, if they've met the standards. Now, you may have a permanent thing that might be going behind that or in some other fashion. It just depends on the trigger mechanisms. What is the flow? What is the impervious? What is the runoff rate, the C
Like the
factor, all the
Publix and,
stuff.
Marvin Gardens and, yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, he'll know that they must have closed it because we got a permit application to do a house on that lot. And normally, they're not gonna bother with it until they're ready to pull that permit. And you want those soil sediment erosion control basins closed and removed as quickly as you can. You wanna get everything restored, get rid of those, because those things, if they don't go maintained, they're required to have a periodic inspection and then an annual certification. And if you don't get rid of those, you're gonna end up with one that becomes problematic down the road. Soil sediment erosion control basins are supposed to be there only during construction and then removed and everything stabilized. Stabilized meaning build something, put grass on it, do something. Don't just leave red mud situation out there. Is that a fair summary? Okay, so I wasn't sure, the reason this on page 1 of 20 is I think that I've got that in there now is the way it's done, that yellow highlighting. Okay,
Yeah,
Very
what we
good.
do once again, luckily, we did sort of run into an issue with this with the 5 properties that were annexed in, the villas of Marvin, because it was a minor subdivision approved by the county of 5 lots, it was like total of 7 acres or something like that. Well, the developers should have pulled a sedimentation erosion control permit and didn't, because all 5 of those lots were being developed at the same time, so legally he was disturbing over an acre. However, that was before us, but ultimately, what we do now with any major subdivision, and kind of what we did with the Sage and Marvin, is that, we'll review the plans from what our ordinance states, but then we also require them to get all applicable outside agency approvals. I request they send a copy so we have them on file for sedimentation erosion control, all that stuff. So, and that's the same kind of trigger. They had to get their proper, yeah. It was weird, but yes.
I hope this has been, so far as being somewhat of an educational process for you too, because you're really getting a chance to sort of look at each part of the puzzle and peel the onion back on that and try to understand it better. Don't try to memorize it. Staff should never try to memorize it. None of us should try to memorize it. We should just know how to navigate the ordinance and work our way through these things. That's what I always recommend. Don't try to memorize this stuff.
Probably the most enlightening thing has been when you separated the legislative versus the planning.
The administrative, yeah. All right.
That is like big for me because we could be in violation of saying we don't like something and that's not our place.
Yeah, understanding what's 160D or,
No worries.
you found it, didn't you? Found 20,
I was about to say.
I found my 20.
yeah,
I had it covered up.
yeah.
I was about to say,
I feel like an idiot.
Didn't turn his phone off, had it,
print
yeah.
11 copies. I make sure that it's well organized for everybody.
What can I say? I'm a troublemaker.
Oh, join the club. All right, so before we officially adjourn our meeting, do you have any other, I don't have the agenda in front of me because I don't have East.
No,
River.
I just, like I said, for the August meeting, the decision just needs to be made if we want to go ahead and, I guess, make a motion to reschedule the regular meeting from August 15th to the 22nd, or the option is that we still meet on the 15th, and if we don't have any business, you guys will be here 5 minutes, if that. It's just requiring you guys to
Yeah,
come in.
So I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't work at home, so the idea of having to rush home from uptown to come for a 5-minute meeting is a waste of gas or my electric charge. So, I mean, we'd have to make a motion to move it, correct? Could I make a motion to move our regularly scheduled August 15th meeting to the 22nd? It's the following Tuesday. Yes.
Very sorry.
Rick, you got some feedback?
I'm doing my part that I said I had to do,
Yep.
that sometimes is unfortunate, but I need to. Your rules of procedure allow for chairs to make motion?
Yes.
Okay.
I found that
That's-
out on Tuesday. I made my first motion on Tuesday. So, but I did ask first. It's a good question, because I had the same question. Mhm. And it was one that we actually discussed in a previous meeting, so. All right, we got a second, so all in favor? All right, if you could let Austin know that we will move the 15th to the 22nd, and if he doesn't mind readjusting the calendar invites, that would be fantastic.
Can do, yeah. Since he's not here, I'm just making sure that I got the motion and all that, because
Yep.
he's
So
gonna go back and watch the recordings, but I know the mics, so,
So I
yeah,
made the
so,
motion, Ken seconded,
and all four voted.
And all four, yep.
Yes. And, I will make sure, Austin's on vacation until next Thursday, so when he returns, or I might be able to shoot him a text, I don't know, he's getting out of the office much needed, so don't necessarily want to bother him, but I'll at least maybe shoot him a text or email to let him know that this motion was made. And then anytime between now and probably next Thursday, we will update your guys' calendars and send those calendar invites out. But the August regular meeting is now scheduled for the 22nd at 6 PM.
excellent. And does anyone, instead of just going around the room, does anyone have any comments they'd like to make before we move to adjourn? Got the blue side and the purple side over here, so.
And I think technically the next thing on the agenda is like the planners update. I don't really, have anything to update you guys on right now, so.
Okay, all right. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Anyone want to make one? Do we have a second? And all in favor? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you, gentlemen. This is your first motion? I'm now the sole remaining female on the board, holding up the lady,